So, Saida, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Such a pleasure. Really, really is.
Yeah, speaking of pleasure, that's the topic today, right? Women's sexual pleasure.
Fantastic.
I guess I like to start with what brought you to this work. Like, how is it that
Oh,
this is what you do?
well, it actually starts when I was 5 years old, to believe it or not. And in those days, I'm Métis, which is kind of like the half breed, I guess, in Canada, where we have certain rights or whatever. But I was raised on a First Canadian Nations reservation, and the atmosphere there it's very intense. But as a little girl, I had great parents. Things were very protected in my home, so I was allowed to explore my body with boundaries, but my parents were very healthy around that. But I didn't know that other people were not healthy around that.
Mm.
So at 5 years old, I'm very innocent. I decide, because I discovered something fantastic about my body that was like making my legs shake. I was like, I gotta tell other people. So I told a bunch of my 5 year old friends in a little circle in the basement of one of their houses. And the teenage sister caught us. And boy, I got in trouble. I was thrown out of that house faster than you can think. And as I was flying through the air, I was like, I don't think she knows where that spot is, because if she did, we wouldn't be in this situation. Like, not,
Right.
I didn't have those words, but that was the gist of what I was thinking. And
Wow.
she must not really know what this is if she's that angry. And so that's where it really started, was with my own body as an organic, natural thing, just as natural as breathing, as natural as sleeping, playing, uh, delight, that sensation of goodness. It started then. And then when I was 20, I nearly died of a very violent rape experience. And it was my journey to listen to pleasure and to follow pleasure, because I was told, like, you have 2 weeks to live. Da, da, da. Clearly,
Wow.
that's not true. Uh, but it was my devotion to pleasure, not the pain, that radically healed in exponential ways my body, and then led me on this journey that eventually helped me create my modality. So that's how it all started, was very direct, intense experiences, but somehow just intuitively knowing that pleasure is a good thing and it's worthy of my attention.
Why do you think it is? I mean, I'm asking you this out of the blue, but why do you think it is that so much of culture thinks pleasure is a very dangerous, especially female pleasure, such a
Yeah.
dangerous thing, right? Like, this is not the attitude of an awful lot of
Yeah,
people.
no, absolutely. So there's a few things. There's a puritanical aspect of, the body is sin, so we can't like delight in that, which is very weird, because if we did believe in this greater God, then why would there be pleasure sensations in the body? Everything is a gift, right?
Right.
So that didn't make sense to me. But I think societally, what happens when little girls are young, the parents, they really want to protect them. It's not that safe out in the big bad world, and little girls are targeted, and they're very innocent. They have no idea what's going on. A lot of them are very sexual without knowing that they're sexual. And so the parents trying to protect them will say, like, you don't do that, or that is bad, or keep that down, or don't, express this, or don't dress this way. Out of really, I believe, the to protect. I don't think it's to harm them. But in that doing of that, what we do, and this is what I see a lot in all of my clients, is they're inherently, women start to live like from the head up, and they don't trust their sensual nature at all. And why that's really wrong is, without sensuality, sensuality is how we make sense of reality. So when we turn that down, we have less information, we're less informed, and we're actually more in danger. So it's counterintuitive maybe for some people, but the way that I look at sensuality, pleasure, it's actually the barometer of sensibility. It's when something feels off, that's because there's something not okay that's going on. But when something feels good, we should be able to relax and just go,
Mm.
okay, this is a good moment.
Yeah, that's some of our
However,
radar. Yeah.
exactly. However, for a lot of us, if we were harmed very young, those wires get crossed, and that which is scary feels safe, and that which is safe feels weird. And so there is a healing process that a lot of us need to go through, where we uncross those wires and start to actually be in right relationship with those sensorial experiences and to really understand them.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about that, about the kind of trauma, how trauma might be cross-wired or the impact of that on somebody's connection?
Absolutely.
Like how you see this with clients or their own connection to their own
Yes.
pleasure and how that healing journey
Well,
goes.
especially if the trauma happens in the formative years. If it happens in prelingual, it's very difficult because this is when everything's being formed. And from my understanding, I'm not a trauma therapist, but I've had to be like trauma embodied because of my own experience and then what I was dealing with. But trauma informed came many years after my career started, by the way. But I have a lot of trauma therapists who train with me. And one of their reflections was, wow, this is the first time we found a way where we can actually grow the pathways instead of just retrain them.
Mm,
So growth gets interrupted if it's at that prelingual stage. So later in life, thankfully, the nervous system is very plastic. So with the right conditions, we can start supporting the body to grow healthy pleasure pathways. But for those who are in postlingual, where we're speaking, but we're still formative, what can happen is we're being taught what is, right? And if love is violent, that's love. And we can't recognize kindness, but kindness is weird. It doesn't exist in our reality. So that's how the wiring gets quote unquote crossed, is that we receive incorrect information to identify what things are. We can't even recognize quote unquote a predator because we've lived amongst them. And so we don't think it's bad, but we don't even attuned to a kind person, or even a kind person might feel repulsive because we're not used to that. My niece is an example of that. When she was a baby, her father was extremely violent. And in that house, there was a lot of unhappy yelling and sounds all the time. And when I laughed around her, she would start to cry.
mm,
But when someone would be angry and yell, she would be relaxed. So that's an example of the wires being crossed. And that's how adaptive we are. And when we're older, this is why it's very important to seek friendships and therapies where the person's very embodied, where you can trust that they actually live the thing that you desire to live. If it's just all talk, it's not actually going to be helpful to that person, because limbic re-imprinting requires that the people we're with actually live the truth, not as a theory.
right. It's not just from the head up, right? Coming out of your mouth.
Correct.
Yeah. And
Correct.
I'm imagining that if you associate your own sense of being a sexual being or, you know, that that's dangerous, that brings danger upon you,
Yeah.
right? If you're to be
Yes.
free in your sexuality,
Yes.
that would be limiting, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And for a lot of times, what I've seen, the extreme expression is, if a woman is sexually molested or abused or traumatized, there's often a polarization that will happen. One side is she completely represses it, shuts down, and like is very cut off from that part of herself, which makes sense, which
Mm,
would be the freeze response to a threat. On the other hand, she could become a predator herself and abuse others, or just abuse her own self, like get involved in sexual activities that are not great for her, or partnerships that aren't great for her. And that would be more like the fighting aspect of that response, where you're more active in the, but it's still reactionary to the
right.
trauma.
Right. Right. It's
So
not.
it's important. Yeah. So the path then is like, it's not about shutting it down. It's not about, being nihilistic about your sexuality. It's about coming home and finding that right alignment. And that's a journey.
Yeah. So I imagine this kind of plays into a conversation of sexual sovereignty, right?
Absolutely.
You want to talk about that a little bit? Like
Yeah.
maybe define that for people in case
Okay, great.
they're
Well,
intrigued.
sovereignty is typically associated with a king or queen, or a land or a country where it's self-sufficient, it's autonomous, it's self-resourced, right? We don't associate it with the normal people typically.
Mm,
Sovereignty is like king, queen, or country. I beg to differ. I think
yeah.
every human being in existence is a sovereign being. And I threw in the word sexual because we avoid it. We don't want to talk about it. And we need to. We need to behave like adults around this conversation. We are born erotic beings, we in the sense that we have this capacity. and we die that way. It's not something that we do, it's just something we are. And so I wanted to normalize the fact that my body and your body, our bodies, they belong to us. And the choices that we get to make about our pleasure, who we want to have pleasure with, how we do it, when we do it, whatever, it's really a sovereign choice. And that's especially true in relationship. You don't own your partner, they don't own you. And it's when you can meet each other that way, there's a new level of respect and curiosity and kindness that can emerge from, wow, okay, like I can't assume this person likes what I like. I can't assume that this person feels safe doing these wild things that I like to do, etc. And so there's a discovery process when we start to treat one another with that greater respect that comes with that. There's a slight political side to it too, meaning that I don't believe that any governing body, whether it's a religious body or an institution, has any right to tell me how I choose to live and be in my own body, how whatever, whether that's identity or, who I'm attracted to or any of that stuff.
Right.
And because I work with a lot of poor countries that don't have the freedom of thought to even be fancy about this stuff, women in some of those countries, they're really regarded only for breeding.
Yeah.
They have no other rights. They are
Yeah.
less than animals, treat how they're treated at times. So this is very important to me to recognize, no, there's a sovereignty to this body. And what surprised me when I did a lot of research, and please correct me if you ever discover this, because I am hoping someone will correct me someday, but I didn't find any charter of right that gives you the right to your own body. You have more rights to your home, like your property, than you do to your own body. And here's why I think that exists. I think it was written by people who never have fear around their body. But for those of us where someone else could make decisions or harm us or do these things to our body without consent and nobody really cares, that's concerning. But for people who don't ever have a fear around that stuff, they wouldn't even mention it because it's not.
Yeah, it's coming from privilege, right? Like I don't even have to consider that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's why I think it's important and why I bring it up in a lot of discussions. And it's actually, to be honest, the thing I saw happen. It didn't matter the culture, it didn't matter the age, it didn't matter the background, nothing. When a person really abides in their body and understands it's a safe place to call home, sexual sovereignty were the words that I was finally came to me to define what I was witnessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's extraordinary.
So this is a little bit of a detour, but I am curious how you even begin to, are you talking to individual women in these cultures that have historically had no power? Are you trying to change it? You can't imagine you're working at a governmental level, but like, how are you starting to get in there and let women know that they could be sovereign in their body?
Yes. Well, originally I thought, okay, the laws need to change and, like rah, rah. But in speaking to senators and speaking to the UN and speaking to bodies that could make this change, they're like, there's no laws for that. And they were really, it's the level of lack of care and it's not established. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
You people forget it. I'm going to have a revolution on the individual level from the roots up. I'm going to speak to regular people and let them know you were born with this and no one gives it to you. You are born, it's innate. So no one can take it, but you will need to take a stand for it. And if we are privileged enough to live in a space where we can do that, because in some countries that doesn't even exist.
Right.
But if we are privileged enough, it is our right to stand and take that stand and really own that, ooh, this is my space. Now, with a right comes responsibility. So it's not just, I have this right and now I'm righteous. It's, oh, I actually need to speak up. Oh, I need to set boundaries. Oh, I need to, whatever it is that I need to do to make sure that this sovereign space is actually healthy, safe, and well cared for.
All right. So let's dive a little bit into pleasure and what are some of the misconceptions or the pitfalls that women fall into that don't connect them to it or don't maximize it?
Well, the first one you already mentioned, it's like, why are we so afraid of it? Why do we inhibit it? Why are we controlling it? If you look just purely at the biology and physiology of a human being, and you look at it very simplistically, like switched on or switched off, right? You got that just with my body language.
Yeah, yeah.
Switched on, everything functions well. My brain functions well, my digestion, my immune, every hormone, everything's good. I'm thrumming, I'm creative, I'm connected, I'm socially engaged. But switched off, I can't think straight. Digestion doesn't work, immune system's low, the hormones are off, everything's off, and then I'm declining quickly. So if you know that, and then you look biochemically and you understand, oh, interestingly enough, the things that are needed for us to thrive, such as nitric oxide, only exist if we generate pleasure.
Hmm.
How weird is that? Okay. I'm not talking just sexual pleasure. I'm talking about this just natural feeling of goodness. You just feel good. Now, some of us maybe have never known that,
Hmm.
but it's there. So the starting point for some people is to go from numbness toward the possibility that maybe something could feel good, or
Hmm.
pain. And sometimes the journey from pain to feeling good, there, or sorry, numbness to feeling good, there is a pain portal.
Yeah, because
Because like,
we're sort of numb for a reason, right? To avoid the pain.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And like if your hand goes numb and then it comes back to life, it hurts for a few minutes when all those little like ants are crawling in there. So when sensation returns in the physical body, it can feel like a lot. It can burn, it can tingle, there's a lot of things going on, which can be alarming if you're not used to it. But I would say keep going, you know, toward this thing, because eventually you'll get to, I have sensation, it doesn't hurt. That's another like kind of point of like recognizing. And then eventually sensation will end up going, actually, that feels good. That's a good feeling. I like that feeling. And then we can start exploring to, ooh, that feels really amazing to, oh my gosh, this is ecstatic. This is blissful. So the full spectrum of what's available, I think is really important, which is why I advocate it. And then unfortunately, a lot of the ideas around pleasure and desire, sex, these things, they've been made into some form of currency,
Mm.
like it's a commodity that we somehow exchange or, value it with some kind of weird thing. Like, I'll give you this if you give me that. And because we've cheapened something that's very natural, then we go out of ourselves to seek it in things that really aren't fulfilling. So for example, um, maybe porn, people who are really only able to have pleasure through porn. I don't think porn is necessarily bad, but when it's your only way, any crutch, I always say, let's question the crutch, right?
Right,
It's
right.
not that it itself is bad, but if it becomes a crutch, then you're not in your sovereignty anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important. So by being able to look at the ways in which we um, think that we need something outside of ourselves to access pleasure, this is also not a part of our sovereignty. This is keeping us in victimhood. Like, I will never be happy unless I have this perfect partner, or I'll never be happy unless I have the wild orgasm I saw in that movie the other day, or these kind of weird standards.
Yeah.
As the thing that I love to remind people is everything's right here in the body. So if we can come back home to ourselves and start feeling secure there and finding where is a place in me that feels really good, and we start exploring, then what's available is fantastic. The body is hardwired for states of bliss that I don't think are measurable. At least for me, I've attained at different moments of my life ecstatic states that almost terrified me. I'm like, wow, I'm not ready to feel that good.
I mean, I'm sitting here thinking one of the misconceptions might be that, oh, this pleasure is all there is. Like if I get
Yeah,
some pleasure, that must be it. And I'm not looking any further than that, right? Like
correct.
some of the, some of what people must need to know is that there's even more.
Yeah, well, we do put a ceiling on pleasure, but here's how we do it through the nervous system. Because we're a pain and suffering oriented society in general is more interesting to us, I think. It's more captivating. We don't exercise the function of the nervous system to digest pleasure, to, be able to handle it. And so as soon as we have a little bit of pleasurable sensation, we try and get rid of it. So
Mm.
we're mildly turned on and it's like an itch we need to scratch. We try and get rid of it right away rather than breathing into it, relaxing into it. One of my favorite things is to train the nervous system instead of arousal or relaxation, it's relaxed arousal. How do you modulate the system where you still feel turned on, but deeply relaxed? This is a really interesting state. And when we can attain that, there's a lot of wonderful side effects of that state. So absolutely, you're correct. We put those glass ceilings on ourselves
Yeah.
and we do it through our habitual lifestyle, the things that we choose. So one of the things I like to say to people, if you have an amazing moment, rather than quickly looking around for the shoe to drop, like something bad to happen, start saying more of that, please.
Yeah. And I
Right?
imagine when you say we try to get rid of it quickly, we get a little bit aroused, let's have an orgasm, right? Like let's finish that and we're done,
Let's
right? As
finish that
opposed
and
to
we're
wait,
done.
let's linger, let's relax, let's stay, let's see
Yeah.
what's possible.
And sometimes it's not even the orgasm. It could be like, I need to do something else to get rid of that feeling of arousal because not
Mm,
everybody wants to go into a sexual thing.
right.
And so they'll get rid of it by picking a fight, or they'll get rid of it by, going to the gym and working out really hard, or they'll get rid of it by whatever. We all have different mechanisms to discharge. This is energy, like it's life force. So we want to discharge this feeling of like, oh, that's a lot
Instead of
to the
walking around with it all the time, right?
we don't know how to cope with it.
Yeah.
Our nervous systems aren't uh we haven't trained them to be able to handle more and more delight, more and more pleasure. It's like we're not allowed to, that there's something essentially wrong with feeling good. And a lot of people ask me, how dare I feel good when the world is suffering? And
Mm,
so I say, how dare you not? Because when you're not feeling good, you cannot access your frontal brain, which is where all innovation and creative thought come from. You're in your amygdala, which is fight or flight. You're going to react. You're not going to be creative. And now you're part of the problem. So if you can feel good, access that feeling of being settled in yourself, now you are contributing to society by being a person that actually is safe to be around, has creative thought, is able to contribute. You're more resourced to help other people who might be going through a hard time. You're more resourced to help yourself if you're going through a hard time.
yeah. So pleasure is almost like a political uh, topic, you know?
It is in that sense. Like it's your human hyperfunction. Like it's a really great function that we have naturally as human beings. We just don't flex it.
Yeah.
And then when we can flex it, we actually can almost, people think like you have a superpower, like you're so magnetic and you make everything happen. I'm like, you can do it too. It's just normal for human beings, but we don't access it. And honestly, nowadays there's so much pain and unhappiness and divisiveness. We could stand to feel a little more connected to ourselves and one another and
Yeah.
have higher regard for ourselves and one another.
Is there a magic pill to this? I mean, you mentioned your methodologies, and I don't know if those are the same thing, but like, what's the
I
secret here?
well, I actually am glad you asked me that. I don't believe there is a magic pill, but if there is an invitation that's magical, it's the one to understand that within your body, you literally can access everything you need to change your life, to feel good, to have the relationship you want, to have the pleasure that you want, I mean, so myself included, went from trauma to surviving that to now thriving. I don't identify with being a survivor of anything because
Yeah.
I'm thriving. Why would I identify with surviving when I can thrive? So that's within all of our capacities. And if I was to say that the magic thing is spend time with yourself, get to know yourself, especially this beautiful body. I don't care who you are, what you look like, what you're from, what age, shape, whatever. Every body feels. There's incredible amount of available sensation. And if your body's a scary place to be right now, how could you be with yourself where that becomes a place that feels more safe?
Yeah.
Because that's safety. We always say, oh, I need a safe space. We need safe spaces. This is it.
Right. This
If
should be it. Yeah.
if you can create that safe space here with yourself, you're now sovereign. You can literally go anywhere in the world. You will be attuned. So you will remove yourself from any situation long before it's a problem. You will not be attracted to certain areas and certain types of people that aren't safe for you because you're listening to yourself, to this body, this vehicle. We lived a long time in nature with a lot of unsafe things around us. So we're super conditioned to thrive. I actually take people out to the wilderness of in South Africa where we live amongst the big five. And it's like a life-threatening thing to do, but it's done in such a way that it's the most relaxed I've ever been in my life is being
Wow.
out there.
So do you have one or two things you could share that people could do to start to connect with their
Yes.
body and tune into pleasure and what feels good?
Why don't we do a couple simple things? Breath is the most important. Uh, and no matter what modality I've looked at, whether it's medical or psychological or sport, anything, breath is the key. And breath will be the key to creating safety and connection with your own body. And what I like to do is identify the front side of your body, I call that front body, that when this front body is contracted, we're signaling to the system of our brain that we're not safe.
Mm.
So a simple practice when you're in a space that feels safe for you and no one's going to interfere is to actually just literally stretch open that front body, open your arms, lift your chin, and really stretch between the pubic bone all the way up and take some nice, full, deep breaths and just spend some time in that posture.
Mm.
That will really start retraining the system that there are moments where I am safe. So that's a really beautiful beginning place that I think that anyone can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
oh
go
yeah.
ahead.
So then a secondary practice, it's a little more edgy, but I think it's an important one. And that's connecting your feeling self. So say like your heart, because we often point to the heart. We're like, I feel, I love. So having a moment where you connect with this part of yourself, and I just call it the center of respect. If love is kind of far away, we can maybe start just with the sensation of respect or heat, and then bringing the other hand down to the lower belly. And if you're a little more daring and it's comfortable, cupping your own genitals and feeling this respectful heat from your heart area, almost like it's moving and flowing down into the genital area. Now, this does many, many things. On a somatic level, it's going to start training your body to be aware of when your mind chooses to move, you can actually create sensation. So that's a super cool skill set.
Right.
When you feel connected, heart genital connection, it's when things start to feel better sensually, sexually. You see little babies, little kids, they'll actually sleep holding themselves this way. So it's very, very natural. It's not a weird thing. And it's a way to self-soothe. It's a way to get to know yourself. It's a way to build intimacy. It's a way to build a stronger front body response, which is a very healthy response to be in. So that little practice, I've taught it for the entirety of my career. And at first people think it's weird, but as they do it more and more, it kind of reveals itself more and more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the way you do it is you put your hands over the heart and you just take a few deep breaths, just kind of connecting with this area of your chest. And if it helps to release tension, just sighing out. That sighing will kind of indicate to the vagal nerve, like we're relaxing. And just doing that a few times will start to de-stress, bring you a little bit more connected. And once you feel connected with this heart area, then you can bring that one hand down and continue to sigh, just that kind of sighing breath as you're connecting in. And this is lovely to do before you fall asleep. If you have a hard time sleeping, it's lovely to do if you've had a really hard day and you just kind of need to feel a self-soothing. It's really wonderful to do before you self-pleasure so that you're more connected with yourself. And it's a lovely thing to do before partnered experiences. So
Right,
you
right.
also are more connected, and you and your partner could do it side by side. And that's actually a really, really great way to create congruence between partners.
I imagine you could do it to each other too,
Oh, yes.
perhaps.
You
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can do it. You can do it whether like you're facing, you can do it where one person's sitting in front of the other and cupping. You can also do it if you are lying down, head away from each other, but the right sides of the body, where one hand is on your heart. And if it's comfortable for you and your partner, your other hand, the right hand, is resting either over their lower belly, their genitals, or their thigh. And you're creating this circuit.
Yeah.
And that is fabulous, especially if couples are in a bit of dissonance or non-concordance in terms of arousal. That practice can really help bring them into resonance and connection.
Yeah. The other thing that's striking me as you describe that is this would be a way, perhaps, I mean, of sending love and respect to your genitals. Like for people that are disconnected from that or have shame messages, or maybe even with trauma, that this would be a way of, you know, sharing that
Yes.
energy and accepting that part of your body.
I have found, on the topic of pleasure and the things that get in the way of it, I have a practice called body love meditation. It's just very simple, but it's a way of touching different parts of your body that you really don't like and sending that respect and love there, and even apologizing and just saying, I really want to get to know you. I'm sorry I don't treat you well. I want to learn. And whatever you feel is natural to say. It's a bit of a process.
Right.
But without that body love connection, I find most sensuality and sexuality practices, they're not very effective
Right.
because the person's dissociated.
Yeah.
So the more we can reassociate, reacquaint ourselves with the body and start to understand, your body doesn't really care what you look like, because it's the sensation that's
Right.
available, and that's available to anyone, anytime. And if you pay attention, like when I spent 3 weeks in the darkness once intentionally, and I could
Good.
look at my body, and I had suddenly started to fall in love with my body and appreciate the parts I didn't like before. I'm like, my belly actually feels yummy, like, because it was curvy and soft, and I didn't appreciate that before, because when I would look at it, I didn't like the way it looked. But when I would touch it and just have a sensual connection to the belly, I was like, oh, this is kind of a really yummy place. And so that body love experience, or body respect experience, I think is a really important step if a person's feeling like, I just, I don't associate at all with my body when I'm sexual. I don't like my body. I think it's disgusting, or my genitals are gross. This would be like a really gentle step to in the direction of really claiming that body sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you share the ways you work with people and where they can reach out or connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's multiple ways I work with people. I work with them like just, it's very important for me that everyone has access to information. So there's a lot of free information through my social media, and also my website, dareyourdesire.com. And then there's a ton of courses. I think I have over a dozen courses that are designed to, like, I have one called Shameless Surrender. And it's fully clothes on. All my stuff is clothes on, because I just feel like there's ways to teach where we can create safety.
Yeah.
Um, but say that one it's really quite a powerful look at shame and then surrender, and those two components together, for example. But then I also work with my colleague Erin Michael. We do a lot of stuff helping people with body mechanics and what that looks like in partnered activity. Together, we help build an actual medical protocol. So with Damo Bioscience, we I've kind of collaborated with them and created this protocol that people can go through, especially around if you have difficulty with penetrative type of experience. And it's for all bodies. So it doesn't matter how you're penetrating and what you're penetrating, but sometimes there's difficulty with that. And so that protocol is very extensive to support with that.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yes, it's been such an honor and pleasure. And I really want to thank the listener and just leave them with you can become your own best lover. And honestly, that's the lover that's going to be with you all of your life. And so it's a really great place to invest a bit of time and attention.